So I want to welcome you all, as usual, to this Monday that the UCC Science and Technology Network is hosting this Science for the Road Ahead webinar series on all of the issues of science around COVID-19 and the issues of church about reopening and returning to worship and all of the different little messy bits that we're discovering in the process. Many of you have, now this is funny. In the chat, I can't hear you at all, Zach, and sound is fine right next to each other. So I'm either...
No, Zach, it says I can't hear your AC at all.
Got it. Your AC. Got it. But can you hear me is the question.
Apparently. Because the immediate comment was your AC, so.
Yeah, thanks, Selena. Okay, I'll try to speak up a little bit. Anyway, we don't need to get into the tech issues here. Here in PA, many churches had started opening, and then Governor Wolf just sent out another order that groups of over 25 are prohibited from meeting inside, which the order doesn't specifically say churches can't meet inside, but previous ones have exempted churches. And so people are making up their own minds. And so we're getting pretty creative out here. And I know around the country, we're all dealing with this kind of one by one, state by state. And so we're going to try to be as broad as possible. But today we're going to be talking about testing, about reporting. We'll touch a little bit on vaccines, but my goodness, that's something that changes really fast. So we're not going to spend too much time on that. But before we do, I want to make sure that everyone has a full supply of toilet paper. Have you all stocked up properly? I know some places are talking about lockdown again. You all have your toilet paper, right? I actually went to the grocery store the other day. Ruth, do you have your?
Well, I'm getting ready to move, and I'm actually taking what I was able to buy with me to my next place. And Bruce, does this help the sound? You had said that I wasn't great, but Zach was loud and clear. This is this is my indication that I need to actually invest in a good microphone system, which Zach's been telling me for weeks.
So I went to the grocery store, and the entire aisle was full of toilet paper for like the first time in months. It was like going back to normal. It was amazing. And, you know, the funny thing about the toilet paper shortage, and this has been something that we've loved to rag on, that, oh, people are people and they're hoarding toilet paper and whatnot. The actual reason why there's been a toilet paper shortage actually has very little to do with human selfishness and everything to do with the way that our short-sighted systems are set up. See, toilet paper is a very low profit margin industry. The major three manufacturing companies are running 24/7 just to make a small profit. And you did not think you were going to sign on today to learn about toilet paper manufacturing, but here we are. So about 50% of toilet paper is made for in-home use, and 50% is made for business and industry, offices, restaurants, and all those things. And if you've worked in those places in supply manufacturing and whatnot, you know that it's a different type of toilet paper. The stuff that you get for your in-home usage is a different type of pulp. It's a different size generally than the ones that are used in industry. And the ones that you can get in bulk for industry don't really fit for in-home usage. And so what happened was people stopped going to work. They stopped going to the office and to the restaurants. And so nobody was using that toilet paper, but everyone was using twice as much at home. And so people were having to buy it at home when they would have been using it at the office. And then suddenly the manufacturers couldn't keep up. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, I mean, this is just supply and demand. They just need to repackage those other ones that they were using for industry and then just sell it for people at home. But it doesn't work that way because the machines are not set up to do that. There are very specialized machines that create toilet paper of a certain size and a certain density of a certain pulp that people are used to. There's issues of packaging and of delivery and all of these supply issues that it was not set up for. And so like that, we ran through all of the consumer stuff. And these businesses were left to try to adapt on their feet, but these industries are not quick to adapt. And so if you go now and you shop for toilet paper, you might find new brands or that you hadn't seen before, or at least new, the same brands, but different packaging. Like there's ones that say like Scott Economy, because that has finally, they've been able to repurpose their industrial machines after a lot of capital investment to turn those ones you might use in the office into ones you can use at home. And it took 4 months for a multi-billion-dollar industry to take one type of toilet paper and then use it in another place where it's not meant to be used. And that's toilet paper. And so if you can just imagine how much more complicated something like testing is for viruses or vaccines. I mean, in any given year, we might be making this flu vaccine and for a certain amount of people. But imagine if you had to then make that vaccine for every single person alive in the world. We wouldn't be able to handle it. It would be like the toilet paper situation all over again. So the same is for testing. The companies that make these sorts of viral tests are only making as many as they need because otherwise they're wasting money. And these sorts of industries don't like to waste money. What industry does like to waste money? So all of a sudden, when you're used to testing maybe a couple 100,000, suddenly you need to test millions a day in order to keep up. The recent estimates from the CDC was that in order to keep our infections under control, we need to get to a point where we're testing over 1 million people every single day just to keep up with contact tracing. And we're nowhere near that capacity. We're still running low on the tests that we need. So before we go into what exactly these tests are and what you can expect from them and how long you have to wait for them and all of that stuff, I want to tell you my own story, my misadventures of COVID testing, because it's pretty terrible. And it's nothing to do with the test itself. It's entirely on me. So the Friday after Easter, I reached for an Oreo from the top of our fridge to do a little late night stress eating, like who doesn't love doing, and was like, man, this Oreo is stale. It must have gone bad. It really doesn't taste like anything. Kind of weird. So I was like, all right, whatever. I went to bed, woke up in the morning, and my wife made eggs, and I poured hot sauce on it like I always do, and was like, this is the blandest meal I think I've ever had. And I realized I can't taste anything. And it was just like this realization out of the blue. And honestly, the only reason I thought about COVID was because I had seen a meme earlier that was like, when you find out that lack of taste is one of the symptoms of COVID and you start thinking about your exes or something like that, and was like, oh, wait, I think that's a symptom of COVID. And then that day, I started to develop really bad headache and muscle pain, joint aches, and just this wave of exhaustion, of more so than I would normally have after Easter. Like I couldn't stand up, sorts of exhaustion. And so I called my doctor. Well, it took me a couple of days of my wife's prodding me to call my doctor because I don't like to do that sort of thing. But I realized like I'm putting people at risk if I don't know. So I called my doctor and I said, all right, these are my symptoms. What do I do? And she said, well, nah, those are not the symptoms that we're testing for right now. And because tests are in limited supply, we're only doing, people who have X, Y, and Z. So, okay, call me back if something changes. So I called back in a few days because nothing had changed, and had just kind of gotten a little worse. And she said, again, like, I can't help you because we only have a limited amount of supplies. And so we have to meet this criteria in order. And one of them being a fever. That was like the big one back in April. And overnight, I got like an itty bitty fever, and I called the next day and I said that, and she was like, all right, that's the magic word. We're getting you a test. So I get the number to call for this drive-through test. And I called when I got there, and they said, all right, we'll be with you in the next 3 hours, and go wait in your car. So I'm waiting in my car and doing what you do when you're waiting in your car for 3 hours, trying to listen to podcasts to distract myself and browsing Facebook. And all I'm seeing when I'm telling people about the fact that I'm sitting there in this test is horror stories about this test. That Trump had said that it seemed like getting a surgery when they take this long swab and they go up your nose so far back that they can get to the back of your throat, and they can swirl it around for about 30 seconds, because generally speaking, back there is one of the places where the virus likes to congregate. And we're finding it can congregate in all kinds of places in your body, but that's one of the easiest places to get to. And so I don't do well with medical procedures. I almost lost consciousness at both of my children's birth. When I give blood, I have to lay down. I have passed out during an eye exam before. Like, it's not pretty. So I'm starting to get nervous. I'm starting to get freaked out, and I'm telling myself, don't do it. I'm looking up how to do breathing exercises, because like I want to be zen all of a sudden. And like, I gotta not freak out. And they finally called my name, and I went inside. It was a very sterile environment. And I'm sitting there on this exam table, and I'm doing all the check-in via phone because they don't want to come in, and because I might be infected. And I'm ready. And the room next to me, a woman starts screaming bloody murder, like someone had cut off her hand. And immediately I felt this cold wash across my body. And I'm like, I know this feeling. This is a bad feeling. This is when I'm about to pass out. So the guy comes in, and I'm like, I'm good. I just want to let you know I've got a history of some bad reactions, but I feel fine. I'm going to be fine. And he pulls out that swab, and it's like this long, and it's in that sterile little thing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to make it. And as he comes near me, I'm like, I'm not going to make it. I'm going to get sick. And then I threw up all over the place, and I had to lay down. Well, not all over the place. He got me a bag just in time, but I filled it. And then I had to lay down, and I was sweating, and it was bad. And he was like, I'm going to call an ambulance because we don't have any fluids here. We don't have any way of helping you. And I don't feel comfortable with you driving. I'm going to call an ambulance. And I'm like, what are they going to do for me? I'm just going to get the test there too. And I'm going to be sick at the hospital. And then who's going to pick up my car? And then and so he's like, okay, I'll come back to you. And so I'm laying there for like 20 minutes trying to not freak myself out. And he comes back in, and he says, okay, are you ready? I said, I'm going to do it. We're going to do it. And so the poor guy, I lean my head back, close my eyes, and he goes in there, and he does the swab, and he pulls it out. And I'm like, wait, that was it? He's like, yep, that was it. It's like, all of that drama for nothing. Well, it turns out he didn't do it right. And I don't blame the guy, because I had this horrible reaction, and he'd been doing this all day long and probably felt like he was like, he could potentially be infected. And why would he want to like do the full 30 seconds on somebody who could throw up on him and spread the disease? And so, it was probably too quick and probably not deep enough. And so they sent it off for testing, and they said, you can, the test can take anywhere between 5 to 14 days to return. And so I waited. And I waited. And my doctor said, in the meantime, pretend like you have it. Because if you have it, then you want to make sure you're not spreading it. If you don't have it, then it's no harm. And so isolate yourself in your house. Your family has to isolate. Nobody can leave the house. So I'm waiting and I'm waiting and I'm waiting. And according to the FDA, this is what happened. Now, I wasn't there when my samples left, but this is how these tests work. So they put it in a sterile container and they seal it and they send it off to a lab. And during the shipping process, these test swabs are kept within a certain temperature range so that the test will be accurate. And the samples have to arrive in that lab within 72 hours. And so they're rushed down to that lab, wherever it was. I have no idea where it was tested. At that point, a lab tech mixes chemicals with the swab to extract the genetic material of any virus that might be present on it. And then they use special chemicals called primers and probes and a high-tech machine to do several controlled heating and cooling cycles, which converts the virus's RNA, which is a single strand, into DNA, which is a double strand, like we have, and then makes millions of copies of that DNA to make it easier to see. And then when the DNA of the virus binds to a specific fluorescent probe that is present in there, it lets off a little special glow, which a high-powered machine can see that glow of a positive result. So the probe that they have binds to the virus because they know what DNA sequence it has. And then when it binds, the little tail on it, that's like a fluorescent tail, goes boop. And then that's how they know that it's a positive. And you can see there's a lot of steps in that, right? Everything from a bad patient to a scared doctor to the transportation to the chemicals to the identification, all of that along the way, there are little places where things could go wrong. And that's why that test has a 30% or so false negative. Ruth.
So I have an infographic here that I think I
Ooh.
can share.
Please.
Thanks to, oh, well, hey, Brooks, can you enable our screen sharing by chance? We'll see if we can do that. If not, I'll send a link to it in our next thing. My nephew happens to be the scientific director of the Society for Laboratory Automation and Screening, and they've been putting together some really cool infographics that explain these things in very
He says it should be
simple
working
ways.
now.
Oh, very good. Okay. Let's see. Here we go. All right. Well, let's stack these one at a do you see three of them or just one of them? I'll put these down here. So this is the diagnostic test. And what Zach is talking about is in column A, the molecular testing. And you can see that the nasal swab picks up the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is the virus that causes COVID. That's an RNA virus. They convert it to DNA. And then you see here that it makes the DNA copies and the colored dyes bind to the genes. And here's the pros. It allows for early detection and it can be processed very quickly once it gets to a lab. But getting it to the lab is the important part. And it's highly selective and specific. So they can pinpoint the specific coronavirus, not just the family of coronaviruses, which is really helpful. But then the cons, it does require skilled personnel and equipment for that. So they really have to tell you, train you to do this well. And it doesn't tell you if the virus is still active. So you could actually be contagious, but still test positive for the virus. And it cannot detect those who've been infected and later recovered. So if you've recovered fully, you're not going to know if you've been infected by taking a molecular test like that.
You can also have you can also be infected but not have a high enough viral load that gets picked up on the nasal swab. It can also be the virus can be in you but not in that location as well. That's another possible iffy issue with that one. It is quick, and in most places that are now equipped, if you go to a major hospital, they can generally get it back to you shortly, but still there's no promise, especially if you're deemed non-essential. And that, might feel offensive to pastors. You are still important, you're just non-essential in this battle, which is one of the reasons why it took so long for me, and I've stories I've heard from others as well. Do you have a graphic at all for the antigen test?
I do, but I just want to tag on to what you were saying. So here in New Hampshire, the governor actually empowered the National Guard to do testing. So there's been 5 testing locations. I went and got tested at the end of June as we were talking about the possibility of resuming outdoor worship. My test took about 6 days before it showed up on my Quest, my own personal Quest thing. And it was negative. What I'm hoping is that at some point we will start to see some of the other forms of testing that other countries have developed, such as the finger stick testing and that kind of thing, which essentially do the same thing on the testing side of things. They just use different bodily fluids for that, because those are quicker. And I understand that in Africa and maybe in a couple of other places, they actually have the rapid result testing like they do for the influenza virus that they do in doctors' offices, for those kinds of things. And that's really going to be sort of the gold standard for schools and churches and that kind of thing over the long term, depending on how vaccine development goes on. So let me share the antibody test now.
Well, before the antibody, there's another test called the antigen test. And that is often called the rapid response test. That's the sort of thing you're talking about that typically tests, it tests your blood, but it's looking for something called antigens, which are developed during this time of fighting the virus. So it can get you results in minutes. It's that kind of like when you get tested for strep, and they can tell you while you're still in the office whether you have strep. It's that kind of quickness, but it also carries with it a little bit less accuracy. It's also really hard to find in the United States right now. So generally speaking, you will not get this test. They're going to give you the molecular test with the swab one, which takes a while to get back. Occasionally, if you're like a surgeon, you might get the rapid one, but they're still very, very rare, despite what the president says about how we are leading the world in testing and anyone can get a test whenever they want. We're not, they can't. And when you do, there's no promise that it will be back to you before your virus is done infecting you. So we are woefully behind in testing now. We're way better than we were before, but we are nowhere near where we need to be. So the other test, which I also just took last week, is one that you get after the fact. This is what is called a serological test or an antibody test. And that's a lovely, lovely graphic. So I'll tell you, I got this test because I still have no taste. And it's been 13 weeks. And we're trying to figure out what's up with that. And so my doctor wanted to get this antibody test. And I had heard that the initial batch of antibody tests were kind of defective. And so I didn't want to do it. And she said they're a lot more reliable now than they used to be. And what they're looking for are antibodies. So what an antibody is, and this is like the coolest thing in the world, okay? So when your body senses some foreign presence, whether it's a virus or bacteria or something like that, it sends these little fighting cells to that foreign body, and they observe it, right? And they kind of take it apart a little bit. And once they have determined that it is a foreign cell, they rip it apart and they carry it back into the body for diagnostic testing. This is all happening within you. And when they identify the shape of that foreign body, they then start producing something called antibodies. And antibodies are these Y-shaped proteins, which you'll see, it's the purple thing right in the middle. They are these Y-shaped proteins, and the tips of the Ys, your body makes specifically to fit whatever the foreign body is inside of you. So in this case, those little Y pieces perfectly fit the protein spikes on the outside of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And so these antibodies float around in your bloodstream, and every time they encounter one of these SARS-CoV-2 virus cells, they latch onto it like a key into a lock, and then they are like a flag, and they wave there in the blood. So all of your T cells, which are like your army cells, your soldiers, they come out and they rip apart the virus. And so if we can identify these antibody cells, which are like meant to be flags, so they're easier to find, then we can tell if a person has been infected in the past and has developed these flags, as they were. So I got it, and it was super easy. And they just took some blood, and I found out the next day. Actually, no, it was that night. I found out that night that my test came back negative, which you can tell is probably a little frustrating to me. And the thing is that there is no promise that these antibodies actually last in your body, especially not for somebody with low symptoms like me. Ruth, do you want to explain a little bit about what we're seeing before I continue on with my bit?
Right. So, and I actually have another one to share that explains how the testing is done. So this is the blood draw, and the pros and cons are pretty simple. So it is a rapid test available at the point of care, like Zach said. It's very inexpensive because it's something that could be easily modified from existing tests. Can be used to test the large populations. And you might have heard that in some places they're doing antibody tests to see how many people have been exposed as part of the way that they're trying to track this disease through populations. And it reliably detects exposure, except that we don't know how rapidly the antibodies disappear from people who have, like Zach said, mild cases. And that's part of the problem, is it can't detect if you're still contagious or if the infection is still present. And it is prone to false negative if the patient has a deferred immune response, which could be, somebody whose immune system doesn't respond very quickly, doesn't respond very strongly, that kind of thing, which is, I think, and I could be wrong about this, but I think that's one of the things that they're concerned about with children who develop the delayed reaction, the multi-system response that's like Kawasaki's disease, because they may have been exposed but not test that they've been exposed until all of a sudden they get sick. So let me see if I can change my screen here so that I get the other one. So this is the assay that they do. And an assay is how they test for the antibodies. It's a little bit how they test for the viral RNA as well, but we'll focus on the antibodies. So they do the blood draw, and they have these detectors that, as it says, apply energy to the sample, and how the light changes is what tells them what they're seeing. And they can set specificity for each target antibody. And each assay response has a positive, a negative, and a control. So in block number 3 down here, you see that a positive is the big turquoise, the negative is the green, and somebody who's showing a response to it will have some of the positive response. And that's a data range that it shows. And then in number 4, it will say patient 1 was negative, patient 2 was negative, and patient 3 shows that antibodies were detected. So they use the target antibodies for this particular infographic. But that's the way that pretty much every antibody test works, and they use an assay to produce the data.
And it's worth mentioning, antibodies are not the only way that your body fights against viruses. Those T cells that your body produced to identify and destroy the virus, they can also stick around for a long time. There's actually some tests being developed. Well, there are some tests that already are developed that show a lot of promise in better testing, because in people for whom the antibodies have decreased, sometimes they still have the T cells. And so you can, for somebody like me, who's still convinced that I did have, and maybe still do, who knows, no, I wouldn't still after all this time, but that if I can maybe find T cells, that would give me some peace of mind at least. Because, you know, the week after I got tested the first time, the CDC added every single one of my symptoms to the official symptom list. And even the fact that I have a loss of taste, but not a loss of smell, is kind of unique to this virus, because it tends to attach to ACE10 cells, receptors that are pretty prominent up there. So, you know, for example, black cherry seltzer for me tastes exactly like black cherry soda, because I can't taste sweet, but because I can still smell, I can tell it's a cherry. But it's a weird world, and it'll make for a great sermon illustration someday if my taste ever comes back. It might not. We don't know the long-term effects of this virus, and we're still only a couple of months in. We're finding that there might be some issues with like some long-term respiratory issues. We don't know. Ruth mentioned this thing that we're seeing in a very small percentage of children, in which they're finding these kids come in with like multiple organ failure, and they can't figure out what's wrong with them, but they all have the antibodies to COVID. And the idea being that they had it, recovered from it, and, you know, didn't even notice, but then their body is continuing to create these antibodies, and the immune response is going into overdrive and is causing all of this problem within them. And it's their own bodies fighting against their own bodies, fighting an imaginary virus that is a little worrying. That sort of a thing, we don't really know. And so while we're putting together policies for return to school, for example, and we say that kids don't get it very much, and we just don't know if there is long-term issues involved with that. And what we need is huge amounts of testing and contact tracing to be able to get a handle on that and a hold of that. So that, I think, is like so that's what happens with the testing. If you have any questions about that, put it in the Q&A. But then the so what and the now what. So when I was presumed positive, even though I tested negative, my doctor still said presumed positive, which meant that I and my family needed to stay in our house with limited interactions other than with delivery people and wonderful church members who brought us food, until I had been symptom-free for 72 hours. The reason for that being that, you wanted to just make sure that it's gone out of me. Now, I still don't have taste, and so we went with all of the other factors. So when my headaches went away and the aches went away and all of that, so 72 hours after that. And then at that point, my family had to go into quarantine for 14 days after that. Because the thinking is, if I was positive and I infected them on the last day that I was contagious, it might not manifest in them for up to 14 days. It's a very long incubation period with this virus. And so to be safe and make sure that they don't have it and that they won't spread it, they had to stay indoors for 14 days. So if you take into consideration from when I first developed symptoms to when I went to the doctor, to when I got tested, to when I got the results back of the tests, and then waited for the symptoms to be over, and then 72 hours after that, and then 14 days after that, my poor wife didn't leave the house for over a month. And now at the time, we were doing services at home, and everyone was in lockdown. And so we relied on the kindness of people around us to, bring us groceries and whatnot. And I lived basically in this guest room where I am right now. But how's that going to work when we're returned to worship? What do we do if a member of your church is presumed positive? Hasn't gotten their test back yet, but Joe Smith in the third pew calls the church and says, "Hey, I'm feeling under the weather and I just got a COVID test and I want to let you know." What do you as a church do in that situation? Do you consider yourself potentially infected and shut down for 2 weeks? Do you clean the pews and hope for the best? Do you wait for a positive or a negative, knowing that the rate of a false negative is up to 30%? And then how do you get in contact with people to give them that choice as well? Because unless you are tested positive, the government will not do any contact tracing. And now when I say that, what I mean is, so if I had tested positive, then what they would have done is they would have asked me, who are all the people that you interacted with in the past 2 weeks, and give us their contact information, and we'll call them and let them know that they could have potentially been infected. And then they'll call all of those people and let them know. That's a lot of work. And I'll tell you, my county is not up to that task. And this is an individual county by county, state by state kind of a deal. So most of our counties are not up for that task. And it would be slow, and there'd be a lot of people who don't participate because of my freedoms and government invasiveness. So, and that's only with a positive. If it's just a presumed positive and that's tested negative, then they won't do any of that. So honestly, that has to be us, right? We need to be keeping track of everyone that comes in our building, and we need to be in contact with them. Ruth, I know that you are in the process of leaving your church, but you all had started the process of getting back together. Do you have a system for that kind of contact tracing?
Well, actually, we do. We've been trying to collect reservations, and we've had minimal response to the actual reservation process. But we do have a system by which attendance is going to be taken. We're hoping, pray God, that the weather cooperates and the case count stays low so we could actually have one last worship service in person with me, because my last Sunday is this coming Sunday. But also because the congregation and the leaders of the congregation want the opportunity to practice what they're going to need to do to resume indoor worship at some point in time when it's slightly safer outside. So there's going to be a weekly attendance by name with each person and each family taken. Each, if anybody's reporting that they have symptoms, then they're going to be asked to call the church and let us know, so that we can then be in contact, either email or phone, with each person who was in attendance, just to let them know that, somebody was feeling under the weather. We're still going to ask people to leave their masks on and sit the 6 feet apart and do all of the other social distance, physical distancing kinds of things, in addition to the preparation for contact tracing. But there are people who want to have worship inside if the weather's not good on Sunday. And I'm incredibly uncomfortable with that. I would rather not take that risk, even though it's my last Sunday, because the last thing I want is for somebody to not know that they've got the virus, and being inside made the difference, whereas it would have been okay outside. We're very fortunate. Our county is small enough that contact tracing is very doable. And when we spoke with the hospital about our plans, they approved of what we were going to do to collect information and that kind of thing, and assured us that they would be, able to help us if anything happened. Where I'm going in Massachusetts, it's a much bigger county. They've had a much higher case rate. I suspect I'm going to be doing Zoom worship for a long time there, because I don't know that we will get to a point of feeling comfortable inside there, because the county is larger and, more people and denser population. So it's really rough. And, we had a staff member who, as it turns out, had COVID back in January, and she tested positive for the antibodies. We didn't know at the time that what she had was COVID, because what it looked like was more like the flu, although she lost her sense of taste and smell for a week. They came back. She wasn't as sick as you were. Why did she have more antibodies later than you with your April test, and then, your late June, early July antibody test? It makes that's one of those oddities of this particular disease, that how it works. For all I know, the 2 or 3 days of sniffles that I had were COVID from her back in January. Even though at that point in time, and we've been very good. We've always done the, if either one of us was feeling punky or whatever, but not punky enough to stay home, fist bumps and elbow bumps and that kind of thing, and no hugging and whatnot. So, we don't think there was any transmission, but then again, she doesn't know where she got it from either. So, it just, and that is another piece of this, is that, we're also there going, okay, well, that's really, really cool. And Mary, in answer to your question, she hadn't left the county since the beginning of December. So we don't know. We don't know if it was somebody that, she visited. We don't know if it was somebody in her family. All of our tourist attractions were still open in January. I mean, we're a tourist county. We had skiers all over the place. We had good snow, so we just don't know how she got it. It's a question that we will probably never know the answer to that.
The week leading up to when I started feeling my symptoms, the only places I had gone to were the grocery store and Lowe's. And that's it. And back then, I was wearing a mask when you didn't have to, and I wore gloves, and I had hand sanitizer, and I had special shoes that I only wore in stores and left in my car, and did every possible protection I could think of, and ended up as my presumptive positive. So in terms of churches, if you're reopening in-person worship, you need to be prepared to shut it down at a moment's notice. You need to have preparations in place to be able to turn it back around to an online worship service, or to just tell people that 1 week we might not have worship, because even if you're following all the distancing and people are masking and they're cleaning and everyone looks like they're doing the right thing, we'll say it again and again and again. There is no magic bullet. There is no way that you can be sure that you can be safe. There is nothing you can do right now that is 100% safe. And no matter how much science you know, no matter how much you follow, there is still danger in gathering, even outdoors. So if, say, in a hypothetical situation, here I am in my wonderful, lovely church here in a borough of Reading, Pennsylvania, a metropolitan area that has roughly 450,000 people, though certainly not as many here in St. Lawrence. So imagine if we're back in worship and then I get word that one person who attended that week is under the weather. I need to shut it down. I can't wait for a positive test, because that test may come in a week or two. And if it's positive, then I've been exposing my people for that long. Because at that service, Joe Smith, who got sick in the third row, he's not going to come back the next week, but he may have infected, Jane Smith over there in the other row without realizing it. And so now she's coming in pre-symptomatic and she's spreading it to someone else. And like that, just those two meetings could go from like one guy with COVID in the church to an outbreak of 50 or 60, like that. It can go that quickly. We've seen that happen, especially in churches, any place where you're congregated indoors for more than 15 minutes. It's just high risk. And so my people need to know that. And we need to be knowing that, all right, so if this guy over here is presumed positive, we're going to shut it down for a little while until we find out, at least 2 weeks. So we know anyone who was there that day isn't spreading. And so one of the ways we're doing that is taking a picture every week. I'm going to take a picture from the pulpit, and twofold, like that helps me to know who they were sitting near and who was there. It also is like, it's a memory of this process that we're through. And so we can look back on it of like this progression of who was there and where they were and how many people, what they were wearing and what it looked like during this time, that we'll be able to, at the end of this, I don't know, maybe do some arts and crafts or something. I'm always trying to think of ways that I can take a horrible situation and slightly liturgize it and make it into something special for people. But this is a part of it, and this is going to be a part of it for some time, because despite the fact that there are some very promising vaccine candidates out there, like the one that was reported this morning out of Oxford, where they say that they're feeling confident that they could have a vaccine out by September. That doesn't mean that you can go to CVS and get a vaccine in September. That means that the next stage of their clinical trial, in which they're distributing it out to 30,000 people or whatever, that can start then. They can start distributing, and they're going to focus on their people, and it's going to be slow and expensive because, like I said with the toilet paper, we don't have the facilities as much. This is why was it Operation Warp Speed here in the US, that the government is pouring billions of dollars into these pharmaceutical companies, so that when they get to a certain stage of testing and they're pretty confident that this is going to be a good one, the government will pay them to start making it early, so that if it does make it through the next trial, we'll already have a stockpile. Now, if it doesn't make it through that trial, then we have to get rid of it all, and we've wasted billions of dollars. But that's the cost of what we're doing. And when we think about the testing, we don't know what's going to happen to somebody who gets reinfected, or somebody who gets the virus and then maybe is in a different place, or the virus is mutated, or we don't know the long term until we go through the long term. And unfortunately, no amount of like clinical testing can tell us what will happen to a body after a year until we've done it. And I will also say, just from a pastoral perspective, and from the perspective of somebody who's keenly aware of the atrocities that the West has imposed on the majority world. One of the things that we're starting to see that is distressing are, how do I word this? So I just read an article about how this vaccine coming out of England is going to be tested in large numbers on volunteers in Brazil, because Brazil is seeing this huge uptick, this huge curve, and there's just so many people that are dealing with it and being infected all the time that it's a great candidate to test a lot of people. Because if you test 1,000 people and 500 of them get sick and they're the ones with the placebo, then like, hey, look, it worked. On the other hand, we are starting to see these European and countries, Western countries, probably us soon, testing out their vaccines in Africa and in South America. And man, this reeks of this kind of disregard for Black and brown bodies that we have done in the name of science in the past, and which is one of the big reasons why a lot of communities of color have a very valid distrust of scientific agencies and the government. We've been really bad about this in the past, and this is going to be something that we need to pay attention to as pastors and be able to speak to, because it's difficult, because we're talking about the greater good of the 7 billion people alive right now who need a vaccine now, but also the immediate needs of the people who are potentially being treated like lab rats, potentially not, but we need to keep focus on this. Ruth.
Well, and not only that, but there's that tension between here in America, the communities that are the hardest hit by the virus are communities of color, the Black and brown communities. And so they would potentially benefit more from a vaccine that works than more wealthier white communities that have access to better medical care and that kind of thing. And yet, how do you do that without that suspicion of, using and abusing bodies potentially? So it's very fraught. I would, in a heartbeat, volunteer for a vaccine, knowing full well that I could get a placebo and then have to be exposed to the virus if they would take me. And I don't know whether they would or not, but I'm a cancer survivor, so I might be in a group that they want to test. To see, because cancer survivors may have different responses, and it may also depend on the type of cancer and that kind of thing. Going back a step, Linda has a question. Will you take phone numbers and names in addition to your picture? And what if there are visitors? Which is a very good question. I was going to ask the same thing, actually. Good question, Linda.
My wife's church went back to worship for one Sunday before this recent order, and have now returned to live streaming worship. And so in that one Sunday, they did a great job of this. And my mother was in town, so she watched the boys, and I actually got to go to church that day, which I don't get to go to church, and I never get to go to her church. And I told her beforehand, I don't want you to go in with me. And I don't want anyone to help me. I want to look at your signs and figure it out myself, and like be a secret shopper. And so I walked in the door, and immediately in the front door, there was a person sitting behind a table, and she had sheets of paper in front of her with all of the members and regular attenders of the church, and little check boxes next to dates, so that she could just check. This person checked in, this person checked in, and then boxes at the bottom for visitors as well. Now, the one thing that she didn't quite get right was, I think she was embarrassed to ask me how to spell my name. Like, she should know because I'm the pastor's husband. So she turned it around and handed me the pen to write my name down, which was like, oh, so close. Don't let the visitors do it, because that defeats the purpose. But yes, if somebody is visiting your church or they are not in your roles already, you need their phone number, address if possible, phone number definitely, because if there's a presumed positive and you're shutting down, you got to let everyone know who was there that Sunday, that there was a person that maybe was infected. And then definitely if you get a positive result, all of those people need to go into self-quarantine for 14 days. 14 days after the exposure.
Okay, so Zach, can you, in the last couple of minutes before we talk about next week and future weeks, say what your church is doing now? And may I guess that you and Nicole are going to be doing joint worship again? Or have you
Nope.
just, oh, wow.
My wife and
Wow.
I have been doing YouTube pre-recorded worship services from our dining room for the past 4 months because we have 2 kids. And so we recorded on Fridays during nap time, and it was stressful and wonderful at the same time. They got through all of their infrastructure of getting back into in-person worship, and they had done such good work on that they want to continue doing that, though without a congregation. So like her and the organist and the lay leader and like 3 or 4 people up in the chancel live streaming to YouTube on in-person Sunday mornings while I'm at home with the boys. And we watched them this week. And my little 2-year-old was really mad that mommy wouldn't say hi back to him, but it was really sweet. So what I'm personally doing is still doing YouTube pre-recorded worship services because it's worked out much better. I've gotten very good at video editing, and it's honestly it works well for where we are right now. I have purchased a camera called a Mevo Start, which is a specifically designed for live streaming. So it connects through your phone, and then you can just push a button and live stream without having to worry about computers and encoders and whatnot, so that has a 6-hour battery life. And so we can bring it into the sanctuary, or I can use it to record, or we can bring it outside, or we can bring it downstairs, or we can bring it wherever, and we can keep broadcasting onto YouTube, which I prefer over broadcasting to Facebook, because apparently you need an account now to go to a Facebook page. You didn't have to do that before, but you do. And when you use a copyrighted song like a hymn on Facebook, sometimes they'll just delete your video without asking you. And on YouTube, they just demonetize it, which is fine because I was never going to run ads on my video anyway. So I prefer YouTube. And whenever we do get back to in-person worship, which was going to be August 9th, but is now pushed back because of the latest order here in Pennsylvania, that will be, we will get there, and we'll have all kinds of wonderful restrictions in place. And then at a moment's notice, people will just need to know that this is what we do. Well, and I'll say one last thing, that my church has put together 4 different COVID committees that are just amazingly helpful. I am the chair of the When and How to Reopen committee, which is exactly what it sounds like. We then send our plans to the Safety and Logistics Committee, who are all full of engineers and people who are type A and think about insurance liabilities and entrances and exits and all that. We have a Communications Committee, who's like just in charge of making signs and calling people and sending emails and all of that. And then we have a Spiritual Care Committee, who is just focused on like, how are people handling this right now? What is going on in their souls, and what can we do to enrich them in this time? So like they've come up with doing socially distant Tai Chi in the coming weeks. And, you know, we have the capacity to live stream all of that stuff now. So that's our plan for right now. And we are letting the virus determine our timeline.
And we've been pre-recording and putting up on YouTube. On the 9th of August, I'm preaching at my home church where my membership is, and they're doing Facebook Live. And then on the 16th, I start doing Zoom services. So life is going to be very interesting. All new learning curves. So Zach, you want to talk? We're just over 4 o'clock, but we should probably say what we're thinking for the next few weeks, and our big one on August the 10th, to remind folks.
Yeah, actually, we've got a bunch of big ones coming up. So the next 3 weeks, if all goes according to plan, is that next week we want to talk about trauma care specifically. Oh, and Mary, to answer your last question, she says, how big is your church? And assume the committees are meeting on Zoom. My church has about 100 regular attenders on a good Sunday, and the committees are all meeting on Zoom. Yes, nobody has met in person anywhere yet. So next week, we want to talk about trauma care. Hopefully, I have a minister who will be joining us, who was an Army chaplain in Iraq and is currently well, I don't want to give you more information on him in case he can't make it that week, and I don't want to blow up his spot. But we'll be talking about caring for people, pastoral care in this time. There's a lot of things around that. Then the week after that, we want to talk about singing and congregational responses. We have a wonderful expert who's been doing this work actually for churches since it all began. And then the week after that, we have one of the foremost experts on viral transmission in heating and cooling systems, who will be coming and talking about your air conditioning. So that is what's coming up in the next 3 weeks. And so you'll see more of that in the email as long as you sign up for that. And
yes. Let me grab the link to that real quick so that if you haven't already done that. And of course, a reminder to look for us on Facebook for the United Church of Christ Science and Technology Network. It's www.facebook.com/UCCSTN is that link. And you can also send us an invitation to join the group where the conversations happen. And we are working on getting the archived edition from last week, which was about youth and children and faith formation. And for those of you who have already seen the Google Doc that I put up with Ian and Karen's information, I know I still have to add stuff to it from some of what we did here. Life has been a little crazy. By pod was just delivered today. So next week, I don't even know where I'm coming to you from next week. I don't know if it's going to be an office or a hotel, but it won't be this house. So still be North Conway. Won't be this house, but we want to thank you all.
Need tips about doing it from your car? Let me know.
It's probably going to be too hot for me to do it from my car, but we want to thank you for your continuing support of us. Please share these links as widely as you can, especially the next 3 weeks. These are really important topics that we think not just clergy, but church members in general could benefit from. And we're excited by your interest, and we're also excited to be talking to these folks because we're both doing this. We're both practitioners, and we're learning as we go. And we appreciate you learning with us as we do this. So, hi, Arvin. So we are greatly appreciative. All right.
Thank you all. Have a blessed week.
Yes, thank you all very much. And we'll send out the links to the archived editions as soon as we have them. So sign up for those emails. Grace and peace, everybody.